Hey everyone, and welcome back to LexTalk podcast. We are
Oh,
absolutely buzzing to kick off Season 5, Episode 6 with all of you.
it's great to be back.
Whether you're a longtime listener, maybe a new follower, or just someone who really loves English and linguistics, we're so glad you're tuning in.
Mm.
Today, we're doing one of our deep dives, really getting into how English is taught here in Thailand.
That's right. Specifically, we're comparing the public school system versus the private school system.
We've pulled together some really good insights. We've got our own notes, of course, but also this great analysis called English Education in Thailand, a comparative analysis.
Of public and private school teaching methods, yeah, it's quite comprehensive.
Exactly. So think of this as, well, your quick guide to understanding the main differences in how English gets taught across the kingdom.
Yeah, our mission really is just to pull out the key nuggets, the most important bits to give you a clear picture.
We're going to be unpacking things like curricula, teacher
Class
qualifications.
sizes, definitely. Resources, too. And ultimately, what does it all mean for the students? The outcomes.
Absolutely, it's a big topic.
So where should we start? Maybe the overall programs?
Yeah, good starting point. Let's look at the basic framework. Public schools first.
Okay.
So public schools are, mostly government funded. They stick pretty closely to the Ministry of Education curriculum, the MOE.
Right, the MOE curriculum.
And what's interesting, as you probably know, is that it's based on the CEFR.
The Common European Framework of Reference for Languages.
Exactly.
Mm.
Which is quite a standard framework globally, focusing on what learners can actually do with the language.
Okay, and public schools also tend to follow national tests, centralized lesson plans, that sort of thing.
Yeah, very much so. Centralized control is a key feature. We noted the New World textbooks are pretty common, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Designed to align with those CEFR levels. So how does that contrast with private schools? Are they totally different?
Well, they generally have a lot more flexibility, more autonomy.
Okay.
So they might adopt international frameworks like Cambridge or maybe Oxford or even the IB, the International Baccalaureate.
Right, each with its own kind of focus.
Or sometimes they just develop their own custom programs tailored to their specific students or philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
And that analysis we mentioned, it really flags these different curricula as like a fundamental difference between the two.
That makes sense. More freedom means more variety, I guess.
Definitely.
Okay, now another thing that really jumps out, and you mentioned it, is class size. That seems like a huge factor.
Oh, absolutely huge. In public schools, you're often looking at, well, 40 students, sometimes even 50 in a single class.
Wow, 50. That's a lot for a language class.
It really is. Think about trying to give individual speaking practice in that scenario.
Yeah.
It's a massive challenge.
Right. Whereas private schools, it's a different story.
Completely different usually. You're typically looking at much smaller numbers, maybe 15 students, perhaps up to 30, somewhere in that range.
So maybe half the size or even less.
Often, yeah. And that smaller size, it just naturally allows for, well, more individualized attention.
And our notes highlighted some key benefits there, didn't they?
For sure. Smaller classes mean more chances for each student to actually speak, to interact. Not just student to student, but crucially, student-to-teacher interaction is much higher.
Which leads to more feedback, presumably. Personalized feedback.
Exactly. Which, as we know, is so important for language learning. It makes you wonder how public school teachers even manage.
Yeah, it puts the situation in public schools into sharp relief. Our notes suggest that speaking practice often gets, well, squeezed out or even skipped entirely.
It's understandable, isn't it? With those numbers and limited time.
Just the logistics. How do you give meaningful speaking practice to 50 kids in 45 minutes?
You really can't, not properly. It shows how something structural, like class size, directly shapes the teaching methods used.
And the student outcomes, eventually.
Okay, so moving from class size, what about the teachers themselves? Their backgrounds, qualifications?
Right. In public schools, it seems the teaching staff is predominantly Thai teachers.
Yeah, that's generally the case.
And while there are foreign teachers, there are fewer of them, and sometimes they're on specific contracts with the MOE, right?
That's a key point. Whereas private schools, well, they often actively recruit native English speakers, or at least teachers trained internationally.
And they might have higher requirements for qualifications, too, like specific teaching certs.
No, much more likely, yes.
Yeah.
You see things like CELTA, the certificate in teaching English to speakers of other languages, or TEFL being required quite often.
Both focused on how to teach English effectively.
Exactly. And the analysis we keep mentioning actually touches on this, the whole native versus non-native teacher hiring preference in private schools.
Right. And the impact that has. We had that example, didn't we? A private school hiring a full-time native speaker
Yeah, maybe on a permanent contract.
versus a public school maybe just bringing someone in part-time just for conversation classes.
It really shows the difference in resources and maybe priorities as well.
So how does this difference in who is teaching translate into how they teach? The methods and philosophies.
Yeah, this is another area where you often see quite a divergence. In many public schools, the traditional grammar translation method is still pretty prevalent.
Okay. Teacher at the front explaining rules, vocabulary lists.
Kind of, yeah. It can be quite teacher-centered.
That probably sounds familiar to a lot of our listeners who went through the system here.
Could well be. Now, private schools, they tend to lean more towards communicative language teaching, CLT.
So focusing more on actually using the language to communicate.
Precisely. Getting students talking, interacting, using English for real-world type tasks. You also see more task-based learning or project-based learning.
More student-centered then.
Definitely. The emphasis shifts towards the students being more active in the learning process.
And what about technology? Does that play a different role?
Oh, massively different, often. Private schools generally have better access and tend to integrate technology more.
Like what kind of things?
Well, you might see flipped classrooms, where students watch lectures or study materials at home.
Freeing up class time for activity.
Exactly. Or content-based instruction, teaching subjects through English.
We had some examples, right? Like private school kids doing English debates or video blogs.
Yeah, things like that. Whereas in comparison, public school students might be doing more, say, grammar worksheets, focusing on exam preparation.
It paints a very different picture of the day-to-day learning experience.
It really does.
Okay, so that connects neatly to resources. Let's talk about the actual tools and tech available.
Right. And this is where the gap can be quite stark. Private schools usually have access to better stuff, frankly.
Like smart boards,
Oh.
language labs.
Yeah. Smart boards, interactive whiteboards, proper language labs, digital textbooks, online platforms, and, crucially, reliable high-speed internet.
Which is fundamental for so much today, isn't it?
Absolutely. Public schools, on the other hand, especially outside the main cities, often rely much more on traditional tools.
Chalkboards, printed handouts.
Pretty much. That analysis actually calls it the ed tech gap.
The ed tech gap, okay.
And it highlights it as a pretty significant and maybe widening disparity.
And we had some examples of that divide too, didn't we?
Yeah, like private school students might easily access English podcasts online or use AI language tools.
Well, public school kids might not even have the device or the internet connection needed.
Exactly.
Hmm.
It's a real digital divide issue within education.
You can really see how that difference in access would impact learning over time.
Hugely.
So, okay, let's pull it all together. What does this all mean for student outcomes, the opportunities they get?
Well, perhaps unsurprisingly, all these differences, curriculum, class size, teachers, resources, they often lead to different outcomes.
Right.
Students from private schools, generally speaking, have higher rates of going on to international universities.
Okay. And taking those big international English tests.
Yeah, exactly. Tests like IELTS or TOEFL,
Mhm.
you see higher participation rates.
Mhm.
They also often seem, well, more confident using English, maybe have better pronunciation due to more exposure.
Broader exposure to the language and culture.
Yeah, that too. And the analysis even mentioned parental expectations playing a role here, influencing those choices.
Interesting point. So what's the typical path for public school students then?
They're more likely to stay within the Thai education system, focusing on preparing for the national exams, like ONET.
And the university entrance exams here in Thailand.
Right, so while they are definitely learning English, the focus might be shaped more by those specific national requirements.
Okay. So just to kind of recap everything we've talked about, this deep dive really shows some pretty substantial differences, doesn't it?
It really does. Between public and private schools in Thailand, the approach to English education varies quite a bit.
Yeah, across the board. Curriculum, teaching methods, who the teachers are, the tech they have access to.
And ultimately, the kind of opportunities that might open up for students.
And for our audience, educators, parents, anyone interested in English learning here, understanding these differences is, well, pretty crucial.
It is. But, and this is really important, we need to remember what the source material also pointed out,
Which is?
that brilliant, dedicated teachers exist in both systems.
Absolutely.
Teachers who are innovative, creative, really care about their students. they can make a huge difference, regardless of the system they're in.
That's such a vital point. It's not just the system, it's the people within it, too.
Exactly. Community support, teacher passion. These things matter immensely.
Great point. Well, looking ahead, next time on LexTalk, we're actually going to build on this. We'll be exploring bilingual education in Thailand, the benefits, the challenges.
Oh, that'll be fascinating. Definitely related.
So make sure you join us for that.
And in the meantime, we really hope you'll think about what we discussed today. You know, the role of these different school environments, the impact on learning English here.
Yeah, what resonated with you? What other questions does this raise about this, well, really complex picture?
Keep pondering those questions.
Absolutely. And hey, don't forget to follow LexTalk. We're on all the platforms, website, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, SoundCloud, Spotify. Just search for @LexTalk Podcast.
Stay connected.
Let's talk, let's learn, let's LexTalk.